Hello and welcome. Let us discuss this question that came in the year 2023 and is related to the topic environmental legislation. The question is, once the central government notifies an area as community reserve, these are the four statements. Number one, the chief wildlife warden of the state becomes the governing authority of such forest. Hunting is not allowed in such area. People of such area are allowed to collect non-timber forest produce. Number 4, people of such area are allowed traditional agricultural practices. Now, as far as community reserves and conservation reserves are concerned, they came with an amendment of 2002 in Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 was amended in 2002, and community reserves and conservation reserves were the areas which were designated for the protection of flora and fauna. Protection of flora and fauna by the local community. As far as community reserve is concerned, by the local community. Now, once an area is designated as community reserve, the chief wildlife warden of the state becomes the governing authority of that area. So, the chief wildlife warden of the, so first statement is correct, because once an area is designated as community reserve, then the chief wildlife warden of the state becomes the governing authority. Now, the chief wildlife warden of the state decides whether hunting should be allowed or not. So, in these areas, hunting is not allowed. Traditional agricultural practices are also not allowed. Whereas as far as non-timber forest produce are concerned, collection of non-timber forest produce or minor forest produce is concerned, then that can be allowed. Now, there was a report in Down to Earth which said that community reserve are the new way to enter Northeast India. Because in northeastern states of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland and Assam, out of the total 214 community reserves in India, 204 are in northeastern states. Now, what happens as far as these community reserves are concerned? The traditional rights or forest rights of forest dwellers are restricted. Because you can see that hunting is restricted, traditional agricultural practices are restricted. So this restricts, these community reserves restricts forest rights of these people, forest dwellers. So if we see the statements again, then hunting is not allowed in such area. People are of such area are allowed to collect non-timber forest produce. This is correct. People of such area are not allowed traditional agricultural practices. So fourth statement is incorrect. So our answer for this question will be only 3 statements are correct. Now let us see Wildlife Protection Act, which was amended in the year 2022. This is the original Amendment Act of 2022. The Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 was amended in 2022, and the major changes which can be seen in the Act is, earlier the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 consisted of 6 schedules, whereas the Wildlife Protection Amendment Act of 2022 consisted of 4 schedules. Also, if we see the short title and definitions of this act or the authorities to be appointed under this act, then Chief Wildlife Warden of the state is the authority as far as community reserve and conservation reserves are concerned. Hunting of wild animals, prohibition of hunting of wild animals, as well as culling of animals. Culling is basically killing of vermin. Culling or killing of vermin. Then protection of specified plants is mentioned in Schedule 4 of the Act. Then protected areas, that is sanctuaries and national parks, are mentioned in this Act, in this Amendment Act. Also, it was mentioned in the Act of 1972 as well. These protected areas were mentioned in 1972 as well. If we see various bodies, then Central Zoo Authority is mentioned. National Tiger Conservation Authority, which is chaired by Union Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, is also mentioned in Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Then Wildlife Control Bureau is mentioned. Then trade or commerce in wild animals, animal articles and trophies is mentioned. And also, this is one of the important aspect which is added, because Schedule 3 of Wildlife Amendment Act consisted of CITES appendices. So, CITES species are mentioned in this Schedule 3 of Wildlife Amendment Act of 2022. Also, prevention and detection of offences and penalties are mentioned in this act. Penalties have been raised as far as the earlier act is concerned. In amendment, penalties have been raised to 1 lakh rupees. If we see the schedules, then Schedule 1 of this act, Amendment Act, consists of animals with higher degree of protection, Schedule 2, animals with lower degree of protection. In higher degree of protection, endangered species are protected. Endangered species like tigers are protected. In Schedule 2, threatened species or non-threatened species are protected. In Schedule 3, CITES appendices species are protected. And in Schedule 4, plants are protected. If we see the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, the original act, then it consisted of 6 schedules, in which first and second schedule was animals with higher degree of protection. This was related to endangered species. Third and fourth schedule was also for animals, but with lesser degree of protection. Fifth schedule was for vermin. Now, vermins are animals that have gone rogue or which destroys crops or creating havoc in the region. So this should be culled. So they were mentioned in Schedule 5. This schedule has been eliminated, and Schedule 6, which was for plant species in 1972 Act, has been moved to Schedule 4 of Amendment 2022. So this plant species schedule, which was earlier Schedule 6, now this has been shifted to Schedule 4, and additional schedule, that is schedule 3, is related to CITES species. Now CITES came into force in 1975, and the first meeting was held in 1963 by IUCN member countries. International Union for Conservation of Nature and Wildlife. So IUCN member countries held a meeting, because of which CITES came into picture. And this CITES, India is also member. India is also signatory of CITES. Hence, to conserve the appendices species mentioned in the CITES, we have amended Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So this question, in which Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 is mentioned, the community reserves are mentioned, other sanctuaries like national parks and wildlife sanctuaries are also mentioned, conservation reserve is mentioned, National Board for Wildlife is mentioned, National Tiger Conservation Authority is mentioned. Also, the authority of Chief Wildlife Warden of the state and the activities that are allowed or not allowed is also mentioned in the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So our answer for this question will be C, only 3. Thank you.